Good morning, once again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Art of Decision Making. I'm Eric Schatzker, and as you can see here, we have yet another all-star panel here at the MISC Global Forum. We have about 45 minutes in front of us, and time permitting, we will get to some questions, so I encourage you to listen closely to what our panelists have to say. Put your questions together, and as I say, if we have the time, I will turn to you on both sides of the room and all the way to the back if we can, so that you can get maximum information out of this distinguished group of industry leaders. Now, this is called the art of decision making for a reason, because what defines leadership more than decision making? We remember great leaders for courage in the face of adversity. And what defines courage? Decisions, of course. Think of this country for just a moment, and the challenges and perhaps even adversity that it faces, and the bold, courageous decisions that the patron of the MISC Foundation, His Royal Highness, the Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has made already with Vision 2030 and the National Transformation Program, gives you an idea of what it takes to be courageous. I'm going to begin this conversation by asking my panelists to share with us a little bit about what they do and the kinds of decisions that they face, important decisions, of course, because we all face small and insignificant decisions, but the important decisions that they have to make on a regular basis. And we're going to go in order here, alphabetical order, and I'm going to begin with the gentleman to my right, Jim Breyer. Jim.
Eric, a pleasure to be in Riyadh. And I'm very excited. I get to do what I love. I invest, and I'm a venture capitalist, and my job is to find and identify the very best entrepreneurs in the world, invest, guide, advise, and hopefully help them build companies, nonprofits that make a huge difference in the world. I'm based in Menlo Park, California, in an area called Sand Hill Road, and invest globally, emerging markets, Silicon Valley, as well as New York and London.
Kareem.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kola Kareem. I run a family-owned group called Shoreline Energy International. Our focus business is Pan-African in 17 countries on the continent of Africa. We are the largest privately owned oil exploration and production company on the continent. Ownership of infrastructure from airports to power plants right across the continent. The focus of my decision making and our story is being able to manage over 5,000 people on the upside. But the difficulties is in the downturn of the last 2 years is being able to manage the downside. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm Josh Steiner from Bloomberg. First of all, let me thank His Highness Mohammed bin Salman and Badr Al-Askar from MISC for having us, and all the colleagues at MISC. We're delighted to be here, and we're very happy yesterday that we had the opportunity to announce an MOU of efforts that Bloomberg will undertake with MISC and educational initiatives here in the Kingdom. Bloomberg is a company of 20,000 people providing financial information, data and analytics, news around the world. And I would say the decisions where we're focused is how we can continue to build and encourage the culture that has made us successful over the last 35 years. We're a private company, still majority owned by our founder and leader, Mike Bloomberg. And I think the most important thing is how we can continue to innovate despite the success we've had over the last 35 years.
Eric.
Good morning. I am Eric Trappier, CEO of Dassault Aviation. So we are in aviation. We are designing and manufacturing fighters like Mirage and Rafale, and we are designing and manufacture Falcon worldwide. We have about 2,000 Falcon flying worldwide and about 1,000 fighters flying in different air forces in the world. So my job is to lead a team with experts, because it's a high technology company, and to be able to share with the team the decisions we have to take to prepare mainly the future and also to make happy our customers.
Like anything in life, good learning is a combination of experience on the one hand and theory on the other. So I'm hoping that in the course of this panel conversation, we're going to get both. Some great anecdotes from our panelists and perhaps some ideas that you can walk away with in practical terms to help you make decisions in the course of your lives and your work experience. And so, Eric, if we might, I'm going to begin with a question that I know all of you were expecting, but perhaps a little later in the conversation. I think we might front load things. I want you all to share with us, again, this is the anecdote part of the conversation, the worst decision you've made in your professional career and why it failed.
There is no worse decision. There are only decisions. I mean, you never know when you take a decision whether it's going to be a good one or a wrong one. What you have to decide is based on the information your team is going to give you about different matters, techniques or logistics, pricing, investment. You have to decide what you are going to do. Then you know whether it is going to be a good decision or a bad decision later on. What you need to have, if it is a wrong decision and you feel at that time that the decision has not been correct, you always need to get a B plan. B plan means if your main plan doesn't work, then you shift immediately to your B plan. Then you don't have any wrong decision. You have only decisions, and that is the beauty of managing industry.
Well, again, in the interest of harvesting
I see
some
you are a little
anecdotes,
bit frustrated, but you know.
there is nothing like illustrating by example. So give us a situation where the process that you described didn't produce an optimal result, and why?
Well, I don't see really a process which doesn't produce a result. You may see the result, for example, if you start a new Falcon and you have to decide whether you are going to take this engine or another engine. You have to take this type of display with this company, which could be a French company or an American company. Well, the decision, the time you take the decision, you feel it's really the good decision. If it is not, then again, you will have to change. So there is no wrong decision. This is what I try to tell you. It's only good decision at the moment you are taking the decision. But you need to be able to adapt yourself based on what are the problems you are going to face. And the problem is not the day you take the decision. The problem is later on. Maybe when you are going to produce an aircraft after a design, it's not exactly what you had in mind when you designed the aircraft. So the manufacturing is going to be a little bit more difficult than expected. So you have to change a little bit your plan. What is difficult, for example, I can tell you, if you are negotiating a big contract with an Air Force, at a certain time, you need to stop to decrease the price because the customer wants to have the better price and you want to have the better price seen by you, and you say stop. And whether you don't know if it's going to buy or not, that is a decision, and when you have said it's finished, you have to follow your decision. If not, you lose face, and if you lose face in a negotiation, it's difficult. So at a certain point, it's really a decision which is hard to take. If at the end someone is going to buy, it's good, everyone is happy. If they don't buy, then you are frustrated because there is no purchase.
Look, I think one of my favorite expressions is don't judge a decision by its outcome. And so I would say that I would differentiate between bad decision-making process and decisions that you made which have a bad outcome. So there are lots of decisions that I've made or our company has made and that we aren't happy with the outcome. That doesn't necessarily mean that we had a bad decision-making process. And so I think that the important part is to make the process as successful as possible. And as I look back and think about where, for example, I wish we had done things differently, and I was in the investment business for many years before I came to Bloomberg, I think at the beginning of our firm, we were too collegial. We spent too much time trying to be a little bit too nice to each other, as opposed to pressing my partners and trying to make sure that they really had conviction about their ideas, that they had done the work that they need to. And so that was not a perfect investment decision-making process. That doesn't necessarily mean that the investments we made were bad, but we should have done a better job with the process. And I think that's where I would spend most of my time focused.
I think coming from a family-owned business, looking at the dynamics in Africa and the Middle East with a similar background and dynamics of business, for us, one of the toughest decisions to make in looking at the outcome and the regrets that follows is in 2001, we were invited to invest in a telecommunications company. When they presented this telecommunications company, I'll give you a very simple analytics. By 2001, mobile telephones in Nigeria, as an example, was only 500,000 lines for 140 million people. So when this company came and made this presentation to us as a family, they gave a projection that this company will break even in 9 years. So I looked at the numbers, taking the decision as the family driver of the business. I thought, no, we're not going to invest in this. If this business is going to break even in 9 years, it didn't make sense. Lo and behold, this business broke even year one. We went back and invested in the same business. Another family friend of ours that invested $3 million in 2001 was valued at 1st of September 2007 at $172 million. Again, that's a regret position, but did I make the decision based on the analysis put in front of me? Yes. And that decision then was not as fortuitous because it was not right. The analysis was correct, and the projections were right, but my decision, unfortunately, was the wrong one. So that's the balancing in making a call as a leader, and your heart should always go with you in what you think, good or bad.
Jim.
Endless lessons. I'm a complete believer now that permanent or semi-permanent capital for the venture capital and investment business is absolutely the right way to go. And that comes from years of seeing that in many cases, the venture capital business can be defined as it's not about hitting singles and doubles, it's trying to hit home runs, grand slams, and holding on to the companies and continuing to build, reinvest. And as I look at the structure of the worldwide venture capital business in terms of supporting entrepreneurs around the world, permanent, semi-permanent capital, to me, is, over the last couple of years, the single most important structural way to continue to help entrepreneurs build billion-dollar, $10 billion, in a couple cases, fortunately, over $100 billion market cap companies over a 10 to 20-year period.
I think what's coming through already are, at the very least, two things from all of our panelists here. One is the importance of making decisions. If you can't make a decision and are overcome with paralysis, you surely will fail because you won't take either one of two paths or perhaps one of many. Standing still is no way to succeed. And secondly, you need a process, right? There's a decision, you've heard of a decision-making tree. Perhaps we can narrow it down in the course of a conversation now to a decision-making hierarchy, or at the very least, some of the things that you need to keep in mind, some of the things that you need to remember and observe if you're going to go through that essential decision-making process. We've already heard, for example, from Eric, that you need to have a plan B, and maybe more than a plan B. And Josh told us that you can't be too nice to each other. So let's, if we could, as they say in English, whiteboard the problem. Come up with some shared ideas about what belongs in a good decision-making process. So let's just make it a little free form. I'm going to write them down, and then maybe at the end of this sort of next several minutes, you guys can walk away with some things to keep in mind when confronted with difficult decisions that require bold or courageous action. What else should we put on that list, gentlemen?
I'll jump in. I've been very lucky and fortunate. In April 2005, I had 3 days to make an investment decision of $10 million into a company called the Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg. I had 3 days to evaluate Mark, who was 20 at the time, his entrepreneurial instincts, the competitive space, and in that case, I was fortunate. Mark turns out to be a genius. And the second really important decision I've learned is no matter how good and brilliant the founder is, recruiting a partner for that founder is equally important. And the second very lucky, fortunate decision was to have lunch and meet with Sheryl Sandberg in March, April 2008 and help her decide to join Facebook as our chief operating officer. Both of those were combinations of analytics, instincts, passion, and luck. And I would offer that as we try to build extraordinary high-performing teams and entrepreneurial ventures, that constant iteration between financial analysis, probability analysis, but gut human instinct is an ongoing part of whether it's entrepreneurial opportunities, investment opportunities, always trying to understand where we are on the playing field and then thinking very long term about how to build something that truly matters and breaks through the upside.
I'm glad that you mentioned the importance of instincts because if you think about it really, decision making isn't just an art, it's a science too. And so gut instinct, if you will, and perhaps a bit of luck as well, is the art of decision making, the genius, if you will, of decision making. But what is genius without a process? And that's the science, if you will. So there's an art to decision making and a science as well. And so I've scribbled down on my list, Jim, a couple of other essential ingredients to decision making: analysis, right? Whether it be a matter of probability, whether it be a matter of financial analysis, and passion, right? Which is something that we might think of as both an art and a science.
So just to add, I guess, quickly, I would say that two other things I would add to the list. One is, I think you really need a diverse group of people. If everyone has the same background, the same education, the same outlook, it's very unlikely that you're going to come to a good decision. And the second thing I would say is you need to create a culture where everyone feels free to speak. When I hold meetings with our management teams, I try, not always successfully, to be the last person to speak as opposed to the first person to speak, so that everyone feels empowered to speak and you make sure that you're getting the views of everyone. And if someone hasn't spoken in a meeting, I'll often call on them, especially the younger people who have a very different perspective. And it's essential that we create an environment where they feel free to speak and you get the benefit of how they're looking at the decision that we're making. So diversity of thought and a culture where people feel free to speak and to say what they really mean.
I think the difficulty from a private family-owned business and a decision maker is this. The onus of making that decision falls on you as the driver of the business. So if, in my example, I have 4 other brothers working in a business my mother started in the 70s, and I try as much as take their views on a certain decision-making process, but at the end of the day, the decision falls on you and your gut feel in making that decision, because what then happens, if it goes wrong, you get the blame. If it goes right, you all get the accolade. So you don't win. So reality of a private family-owned business compared to the sectors you're all coming from, the views are different, but reality is the man in front takes the beating and the decision made right or wrong. That's key.
I would add that in our high-tech industry, we need to have the right people at the right place. Meaning is, you need to have the right scientists, you need to have the right engineers, the right financial guys, and all together, they are going to support you in your decision. I agree also on the fact that you need to try to have a wide representation of people, because if you have only one source, then you are going to base your decision on one source. So it's good to have different source of information. But I totally agree with Jim saying that at the end, it's your instinct, it's your feeling, which is going to lead your decision, because you are going to be facing the problem and saying, yes, I go this way. So you need the information, you need the right people, you need the team spirit, because it's not only individuals, it's also people together, team together, which is going to help you to take your decision. But at the end, you have to take your decision, and this is going to be based on your instinct, because you are going to have different types of proposals from your collaborators. And it is your decision making that is going to be expected from the group. So it's something which is very special at a certain point, and you have to decide, because if you don't decide, it's a bad decision. This is a wrong decision. The wrong decision is not to decide. You have to decide.
So let's just go through our list now for a moment. We have the importance of a plan B. We have the need to be, if not confrontational, honest and tough with each other, not too friendly. The importance of analysis and passion. The importance of diversity. Right? Have a diverse group of people. As you said, Josh, if everybody comes from the same background, speaks the same language, went to the same schools, comes from the same sort of socioeconomic stratum, you're not going to get a plurality of views from which you can distill the best idea. You need a culture of transparency and openness, and you need the right people around you. In some cases, depending on how large and hierarchical your organization, that really comes down to hiring in some cases. What's missing? Is there anything, and of course, as you mentioned, Jim, the importance of luck and instinct. What else belongs on this list before we conclude?
The balance of age. I spend an enormous amount of my time visiting campuses throughout the world, and it's the students, the postdoctoral fellows, the faculty that are driving so much of the most compelling transformations, whether it's in healthcare, education, technology. I'm stunned at how many of the good, compelling new ideas are coming from entrepreneurs in their 20s. And as I think about whether it's a 2030 strategic plan from MISC or other strategic plans where we're looking out 10 or 15 years, the balance of age and the importance of youth and experimentation, to me, is what is going to drive outsized, compelling investment returns over the next decade.
I think that's right. I think to emphasize Cola's point, you need to have in your culture someone who wants to make decisions. The reality is some people like making decisions, and some people actually don't like making decisions. Most people will tell you that they do. In fact, a lot of people don't, and that's okay. There's a role in organizations from people who like to provide information, like to provide analysis, want to help you, and actually don't want to make the decision him or herself. As Cola said, someone's got to step up and make the decision. And the second thing I probably would say is understanding when a decision really needs to get made. Jim gave the example of when he needed to make a decision in 72 hours. I think to your point, Eric, some decisions have to be made on a tight time frame. Some decisions don't, and I think part of being an effective leader in an organization is understanding what decision needs to be made quickly and what decision should be allowed to mature, and allow yourself to get more information and not make it until you have to. And there isn't often clarity about that timing, and that timing is pretty important.
What about the where? Not everyone has, clearly, as was the case for you and Facebook, Jim, the luxury of time. But when you do have the luxury of time, is there something that any of you has found to be, and again, I know that it's highly individual, but something that you've found helps you to make quality decisions, whether it's taking time away from the office, going on a ski vacation, finding yourself on top of the mountain, or perhaps on a walk through the desert. Is it important to clear your head to make good decisions, or are the best decisions made under pressure in the heat of the moment?
I think that you have two types of decisions. One can be taken under stress because you need to react within a second, and it's only a kind of sensitive decision. Some others, which will involve the company for a long term, which is always the case in a high-tech industry, you need to mature. And to mature, you don't need to be stressed. I mean, you need to keep some time for you to mature everything which has been told to you and make your decision really in a quiet environment. Meaning is that you should not react too much. You should really take a decision because you know that it's going to involve the long term. In that case, I don't know if you are going to take some one day off or playing golf or I don't know what, but at least you should not take such a long-term decision in a stress environment. You need to be sure of what you are going. It's better to take 1 or 2 more days before to decide than to say, I have to decide today, so I will do it today. You can wait. Not too much, but you can wait.
I think in a private sector of family-owned business, making a long-term decision that would affect the future and the generations of the ownership of the business is something you should never take lightly. It's a decision that should involve the family involved in the business, and more importantly, make it a consensus decision. So when and if anything happens, it's not falling on you alone. It's a consensus decision that was made by the family, but led by you.
Travel extensively. Here we are in Riyadh. The very best entrepreneurs, the very best investors, I believe, love to travel. It's humbling. We're always learning. And in terms of the investment landscape, as much as I love Silicon Valley and technology, the great companies over the next decade will be formed worldwide around emerging markets in big verticals such as healthcare and travel and financial services. And my advice, love reading, love travel, love engaging, and be curious, because there's always something new to learn, whether it's investing, venture capital, or entrepreneurship. And it's a fascinating, humbling business, but those are some characteristics I find really make a difference when I'm trying to make decisions, short, medium, or long term, around investing, or anything for that matter around business.
Kola, you brought up something just a moment ago which I think is worth us talking about, at least for a couple of minutes, because it's something that every one of you will encounter, whether it's in business, whether it's in politics, and you already know that it's something that comes up in family life. The challenge between consensus and leadership. How do you balance the two? The need for everyone to buy in, because sometimes that's what's required, and at other times, the need for somebody to take a leading role and just get on with it. Because, again, going back to the very first point that was made, a decision has to be taken.
The dynamics is this. Look at my family. We're 6 of us in number. I am number 4, but I was chosen by my mother as the CEO of the group. That was her decision based on her evaluation of her children. And that you find in a lot of families with the similarities in the Middle East and in Africa, because we're family-owned businesses. But the key decider should always be, as a leader leading a business or an organization, the decision to move or not to move falls on you. So you need to compartmentalize your mindset in making decisions based on facts, based on proven opportunities that's put in front of you. So you could be guided aright by carrying people along within the family subset in making sure that decision was made for and on behalf of the family for the betterment of the business as a whole, not for your self-interest. And that you must always make sure you carry everyone along the line along.
I think that's very true, Colin, and very well put. I think the only other thing I would say is, I think in really well-run organizations, you get to the point where hopefully the leader is making fewer and fewer decisions. I think one of the great strengths of our company is the teams that we have in place. And so I look to the people who are running our various businesses and hope to get to the point where they're calling me much less frequently, where they're asking my advice less frequently, where they're coming to me only with their hardest problems, because they're getting better and better as leaders themselves, and therefore making more and more of the decisions themselves. So I think your description of very tough decisions and the consensual process is exactly right. And you hope to get to the point in a large organization such as ours where more and more of the decisions are being made by people lower and lower in the organization, because that empowers them, encourages them, and teaches them to become leaders themselves.
One of the things, it may in fact accurately be described as the toughest decision or the toughest kind of decision that anyone may face in his or her career is that of having to fire somebody. Having to fire somebody you like, having to fire somebody you value, having to fire someone whom you might even consider a friend. Help these people walk through the process of having to take a decision like that. Because many, if not every one of these individuals is going to have to confront that over time.
Well, the investment business is a little different, and I'm on large boards, Blackstone and 21st Century Fox, and been on Facebook and others. So as a board member, one of our jobs is when a company is scaling and performance is not in that top or 20%, we have to find a way to fire that person or to find a way to replace that person because the stakes are too high. And in the worlds that I live in, technology investing and investing, the top 10% or 5% really generate 90% of the value. And so the easy decisions are to be very fair and candid when someone is not performing well. The hardest decisions are when someone is performing B plus, A minus, but we know the competition is operating at an A or A plus, whether it's investment returns or technology. And those are the proactive decisions where, as a board member, investor, advisor, I suggest to the entrepreneurs and CEOs to scale the business and get into the right position 3 to 5 years from now. We have to improve this senior executive area from a B plus or A minus to an A or A plus if we truly want to be world class. And that's simply, again, from a board member, advisor, large shareholder standpoint, the most important ongoing lesson that I continuously confront. How do we operate when someone's a B plus or A minus or just under an A, but we know we want to get to an A plus? How do we proactively do that? And that's just part of the ongoing decision making and process from a board and investment standpoint.
I would add that as a CEO, you have to report to your shareholders and you have to perform. So the key point to decide to perform is to choose your team. And the casting is what is the most important in a company. You have to find the people who are going to perform by individual, as a team, because it's not only one guy who is going to perform, it's a team which is going to perform. And you need to give your confidence to these people. So confidence is also something which is very important. If you don't have any confidence, whether your engineer is good or not, but you don't have confidence in him, doesn't work. What is going to work is because you know that when he's telling you something, you can rely on the information he's going to give you. So the organization is going to be built up around the casting. The casting is the most important.
I agree with that. I think I would just say 2 points on this question of firing. I have 2 pretty simple rules. One is the person you're firing I don't think should ever be surprised. You should have had enough conversations with him or her over the previous 6 months, a year, to say, this isn't going well, this is where I need you to improve, this is why we're having a problem. You know, to Jim's point, maybe just the competition is doing much better than us, why that is. So that if you get to the point where he or she has to be fired, they're not surprised. And the second question I always ask myself is, have I done everything I can to help that person succeed? Have I spent enough time with him or her to teach them? Have I given them opportunities for training? Have I given them opportunities to take on new responsibilities? And if both of those things are true, they're not surprised, and you feel like you've done everything you can. It's certainly painful. It's not easy. But at least you feel to yourself you've done everything you can to make that person successful.
I think the test of strong and good leadership is about making decisions, good or bad. From a private sector, family-owned point of view, it's a different measure. A typical example, with the global downturn in commodity prices, we've got an oil service business. The biggest decision for me was having to make that decision to fire people who have worked for us for 25 years. Now you can imagine the dedication from these people is not out of their fault, but unfortunate position of where the global world with commodity pricing finds itself. Being a leader, having to make that decision, again, with consensus with the family, in saying, look, we're faced with this problem. If we do not reduce the staff, looking at our income and expenditure, our business is at risk. So making sure as a leader that decision-making process is a consensus, collegiate, but that decision has to be made and called by someone called the leader of the organization. And that is a tough decision to make, but it's got to be made. So it's either taking that line or letting the business suffer, and that outline is a very strong one.
Panelists, I have put together quite an impressive list of the keys to decision making, which I'm going to review at the end of our conversation. I was hoping we would have time for questions, and I think we should take some questions from the floor. So if some of you have questions, could we please have the microphones out and the paddles out? I see a hand, I see a number. So here we go, gentlemen, our first question.
Good morning, this is Wala, Economic Development Consultant. My question to you is, to what extent emotions would affect any decision? And when I say emotions, I mean a deal, not a person to fire. I remember the discussion with one from Qatar who did the deal with Harrods, and he told me clearly, my advice is don't fall in love with the deal till you end it. Otherwise, like I would, he told me that he spent 3 years to close the deal with Harrods, with Mohammed Al-Fayed. So, to what extent this would affect the decision? Thank you.
Good question.
I started laughing because it's a very typical position in a family-owned business. It is very important you make a decision taking your emotions out of that decision process. We made a decision many years ago, about 6 years ago, going into the fashion industry, because as Africa's middle class was emerging, it became an interesting thing. So Roberto Cavalli, Franca Sozzani, we brought them traveling in West Africa thinking in a crazy way we could set up this high fashion. We've seen Dubai and Saudi Arabia, but we forgot, I forgot, to realize the market we're trying to focus on does not have the income flow to support that business. But I was carried away. So it's a learning process. Detach your emotions from making very factual decisions that should be backed up by analytics in making that decision.
I have to say, again, Silicon Valley, the technology business, is a little bit different because we're trying to bet 7 to 10 years on what the world looks like and what are the right teams to be pursuing opportunities that are not visible for major companies and competitors. And I admit part of why I love the venture capital investment business, I fall in love with our teams, particularly when they're high performing in difficult markets. As an investor, you're always fighting cycles. And we learn very quickly, cycles are bigger than any one investment thesis. But finding teams that thrive through very difficult cycles are teams and opportunities and companies that I do tend to fall in love with. And I do tend to, as I mentioned earlier, hope and continuously hope to hold on to those for very long periods of time, because I just can't find that many new opportunities where it's possible to reinvest at the same rate of return.
We have a number of other questions. Let's go to number 3 down back there, please.
My name is Ali Al-Sharif. I would like to ask about the process after the decision has been taken. I think a lot of things should be taken or considered, such as a change management. I mean, there is a resistance after the decision might be related to the people. We need a lot of effort that would increase the awareness and make sure the people, they have enough knowledge for this kind of change and the ability and the reinforcement. These kind of tools would have a significant impact on the decision, is affected, the decision might be wrong or right. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree. When you have been able to take a decision, then you have to take your time to check that the decision you have taken is a good one by performing the job you have to perform. So you have to put in the rails the right team, the right expertise, and you have to follow yourself, even as a CEO, that things are going and be processed as well as you would like it to be. So it's not only to take decision, it's also to check that the decision you have taken are well processed. So the process by itself will be to give the lead to someone who is in charge of the deal, of the process, and then he will make his own team with the tools to be able to process a contract or a development or an investment.
I agree with that. I would just say two quick things. One is, there's an expression I like, which is, no one's heard you until you're tired of saying it, right? You just can't communicate enough, especially in complicated decisions. And you have to do it in a whole variety of different ways. You have to do it in small groups and big groups. You have to do it over email and videos. And you have to keep repeating the messages. And the second thing, which Sam Palmisano, the former CEO of IBM, used to say, is having too many priorities is the best friend of poor management teams. Because if you give people too many things to do, they choose the one which is easiest, as opposed to focusing on things which are hardest, and that kind of change management that you're discussing. So I think it's important, if you're trying to do something really hard, that you don't ask people to do too many things, because they won't focus on the hard tasks.
As a private business, family owned, for us, the best benchmark is leaving your door as a leader open to all the cadre of your staff to have access to you. That's the fastest way you can benchmark the aftermath of your decision-making process, in making sure it filters down the chain.
Another question. Back to number one, please.
Hi, my name is Fatima. I would like to welcome all the guest speakers. It was very nice listening to your experience and a bit of your knowledge. It is true, a decision maker and leader should, as we say, have like a lion's heart. Too brave to take a step forward and a great risk taker, as we might say. Because yes, you might not get the outcome that you want in your decision making, but it doesn't mean you've lost totally. You will definitely learn something from that lesson or from that decision. I have two questions for you. One of them, you touched based on the fact that some people are too afraid or not, let's say, fully alert how to make decisions, or they don't like to make decisions at all. Now, in terms of your knowledge and background, what's the best way to encourage them and raise awareness of how to learn to be a decision maker, whether it's good or bad, but how to? Another question, sorry, I've got some. Another question is that from what age should we start teaching that in terms of children or in terms of young adults? Because they are the new generation, they are the new leaders in their lives or for their countries. Plus, the other question is for Mr. Kola, when you touched based on the fact that coming back from a specific background or even any other Asian background, let's say, sometimes the family do recognize someone who's highly positive or active in the family. Yes, you're the decision maker. Because they always, let's say, they're upfront or they like to decide or take the courage to do something. So in my statement, I would like to ask, what do you exactly do to raise the awareness of whoever's around you as a member of a family or as an employee? That you shouldn't ignore the fact that they're not taking this step, or you've been highly recognized in between them that, it's only me who does everything or decide for everything.
In the interest of trying to squeeze in one more after this, Kola, please answer that question, then we'll have one answer to the other question, and then we'll squeeze in one last one.
What is key critical is your ability as a leader in a family business in engaging the family as a whole, making sure everyone is carried along, but making everyone recognize that you have to make that decision on behalf of all. Secondly, recognizing children. I think what my mother's done is from a very young age, and as you see the dynamics of a global world, decision making should start from a very young age, making sure your children take responsibility for whatever actions, good or bad, that they deal with or face with. That's key critical because in time, that psychological positioning gives a balanced measurement in looking and evaluating decision making. The third position from your question is, look, the reality to life in a family-owned business is making sure the benchmark of a leader is ability to acknowledge other people's thought process, not only listening to your own voice, thinking you are superior. Always take that evaluation, making sure that this is one family as a unit, and the decision of this family stands with the family, good or bad, for all to deal with together.
In the interests of time and fairness, I'm going to make a decision, which is that we have one last question, and let's just make it, please, a single question before we conclude the panel. Number 4, please.
Hello, my name is Zaid Mshari. I'm a strategic communication consultant. I have been studying the art of making decisions for years. There's one question that I haven't found an answer for yet, and it goes like this. What is the difference between persistence and entrapment? When should I stick to my decision and when I shouldn't stick to my decision?
I would study Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg as leaders in terms of persistence, sticking with vision, working together as a team to figure out when to be persistent and when not to be persistent. There are other examples, but I can't think of a better team in the world of the internet and technology than Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg.
Quickly, anyone else want to add to that, please?
I would say B plan. If you are not sure, go directly to the B plan. It could be better than the A plan.
Yeah, and I would just close by saying I think ultimately culture is far more important than strategy. So if your culture is broken, you got to fix that, and don't be persistent. A broken culture will kill any organization. Strategies can change, and they should change, but the culture is foundational, and persistence is a bad mistake with a poor culture.
I think supporting what has just been said, the reality to art of making decisions is you've got to make sure you have a cultural focus on where you see your business, how you see your business, the future of where you want to be with your business, and reality is knowing and owning up to the fact that you making that decision affects the business.
I said at the conclusion of this panel I was going to review the ingredients to good decision making, and I think we've come up with quite a list. Recognizing first that there's an art and a science to decision making. And on the art side, I hope luck is in your favor, but that you trust your instincts and that you have passion for what you're doing. On the science side, be dispassionate to a degree. Don't be afraid of analysis, and don't fall in love with your idea. The importance of teamwork, but at the same time, don't be too collegial. Have the right people, hire well, and recognize the crucial importance of human capital. Create an environment of diversity. Again, if all of you are the same, you're just going to come up with the same ideas. Recognize that youthful perspective plays a role. Don't forget about the kids. Create a culture of openness and transparency. If you can, impose a governance structure that will help you and hurt you if you don't have it, perhaps. Recognize the importance of timing and patience. Expose yourself to ideas, fresh ideas. Travel as much as you can. Read as widely as you can. Here's one I'm going to add that didn't come up, but which I remind myself of all the time. Recognize what you can and can't control. Focus on what you can and do your best to forget about what you can't. The oil prices come up a couple of times. Good example of something you can't control. Balance consensus and leadership. Have a plan B. And above all, folks, make a decision. Get over your fear of failure. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists here at the Miss Global Forum.